Hello, folks. Welcome to a new episode of the Sox Machine podcast, part of the Foul Territory Network. We are streaming live for this episode on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. Quite a bit to talk about on this Friday, August 21st. The White Sox have a big home series against the New York Mets, a New York Mets team that's been playing a lot better. Their veterans are now healthy, but with the Mets back in town to face the White Sox, that means Luis Robert Jr. is also back in town to face his former team. We'll be tracking as far as how that trade has been going between the White Sox and Mets. It's been working out pretty well for the White Sox point of view, as we'll review on how Luis Roberts' 2026 season has been going. We'll also take a look around the American League Central, as the White Sox lead heading into this weekend has shrunk a little bit. The Minnesota Twins, if the season were to end today, would be in the playoffs. Are you buying the Twins as a playoff team? So for those that are watching the live stream, of course, you can be part of the show, put in your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll display them on the overlays as we continue to stream. But joining me in this episode of the Sox Machine podcast is the managing editor of SoxMachine.com. It's Jim Margulis. And Jim, I would love to start on the baseball front, but we do have some off the field and some White Sox business. Kenny Williams is not around, Jim. He can't yell at us for being involved in White Sox. And we do have an update as far as the White Sox plans for their new stadium efforts. And I reported on this on SoxMachine.com regarding the community meeting with Amtrak and Bridgeport. And the big takeaway from this meeting is that Amtrak, Jim, was trying to, I guess, a presentation of what is to be coming to the Bridgeport neighborhood. And I think in your experience, Jim, as far as working in the newspapers before going Sox Machine full time, you've covered these community type of events, right? Where someone's pitching something to the city and to the public and the residents are responding like in live, in real time of either approval or disapproving as far as these plans.
Not in a while. I mean, I did so in college. My experience in newspapers is reading them and presenting them and hearing the reporters come back saying, "Oh, get a load of this," or here's a person who hogged 20 minutes of the meeting that'll never get back. That kind of stuff. But yeah, it's been a while. But probably Parks and Rec is my
Yeah.
closest exposure to the way those meetings can go sideways. So yeah, I guess you can tell me if that's something we should be thinking of or have in mind for a comp.
That's a good comp. It's not as funny though as in Parks and Rec, where someone is filibustering reading Star Wars fan fiction. No, Bridgeport residents were quite upset.
Yeah.
And with the field house being packed at Armor Park, and they're going to be having a second meeting in Bridgeport on August 26th, which Sox Machine will be at again to report on how that goes. It was a weird dynamic because there is an ever growing population of Chinese Americans in the Bridgeport neighborhood. So at the beginning part of the presentation, they would start presenting and then everybody would have to wait for the Mandarin translation. That really slowed things down and that just built up as far as the anger over time, Jim, in this field house of residents not really wanting the sales pitch. They wanted immediately to go into the questions and answers portion of this presentation of what exactly is Amtrak planning for their neighborhood. So, for this episode, for those that are listening to the recorded part of the podcast, I'll give you guys a play by play as best as I can. For those that are watching on YouTube, you're going to be seeing some visualizations and I will be calling them out. The first visualization of what's most important about this Amtrak project coming into Bridgeport is the plans that they have between 33rd and 35th. And this is the rail yard that splits lots C and G at Rate Field. For those that are having a hard time visualizing this, this is literally a block away from Cork and Kerry. So I know White Sox fans know where Cork and Kerry is, that Irish bar. It is one block east of that bar, splitting lot C and G for Rate Field. And the now understanding as far as this part of the rail yard, that will be building this new 24 by 7 constantly running maintenance facility that will store 6 full length Amtrak trains, so reaching up to 1,100 feet, that will be constantly running. So this is where Bridgeport residents are very concerned, especially residents that live near these parking lots and near this rail line. Is that their concern is that if you have 6 locomotives constantly running their diesel engine, that's just going to add way more noise and air pollution to the neighborhood. Now, there are those that have mentioned that the area already has quite a bit of air and noise pollution because there is a Major League Baseball team. Teams drive into the neighborhood, they park there, and then they leave. So, this will just be adding to what already exists and it'll be ongoing. And the timeline for this project for Amtrak is very quick. So, as of right now, a day after the meeting, Amtrak and Union Pacific. So Union Pacific currently owns this rail yard. They have an agreement for Amtrak to purchase this rail yard. Once all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, Amtrak will gain control of this area of land on the rail. And once they have full control, they are this fall going to be getting the necessary permits and providing the final designs and start the prep work in building this new maintenance facility on this section of the rail. This will be taking place almost through the calendar year of 2027. And their hope is that operations can start either in late 2027 or very early of 2028. So again, I'll bring up as far as this visualization. The reason why I called this out in today's piece, Jim, is
Hmm.
that we have not really heard anything from the current Chicago White Sox organization. And I say current because it's very clear in the field house that Bridgeport residents are not oblivious. They know that this project is being pushed and funded by Justin Ishbia, whether that's creating new companies like Canal Edge to lead the efforts to work in tandem with Amtrak. But it was Canal Edge who was able to secure the federal funding thanks to Justin Ishbia, in which Ishbia was able to hire 3 federal lobbyists in order for Canal Edge to get this funding to help build this new maintenance facility for Amtrak. Whereas if Amtrak tried to do this alone, Jim, it could take like a decade for them to be able to achieve this project instead of being able to turn this around in a year, which is incredibly fast. But what's curious to me about this part of the project, not hearing from the White Sox, is that this clearly does impact the White Sox. Like, I don't know if it was part of any of their plans in which Bridgeport and the surrounding parking lots become more industrial, Jim, than
Hmm.
residential or commercial. So this is where I'm a bit curious and why we haven't heard from the White Sox.
Yeah, I mean, this is the awkward part of the agreement that Justin Ishbia has with Jerry Reinsdorf and the ability to sell the team as soon as 2029, but it could theoretically last through the 2033 season. And you have Ishbia maneuvering to secure a plot of land that he would like to probably build a ballpark on, and but he doesn't necessarily have control over the organization yet to be speaking for the White Sox. As far as we know with Jerry Reinsdorf, last we heard was that they still wanted the 78 and to split the lot that the Chicago Fire are building on, given that they've run into the impasse with getting state funds, given that the Bears are having the same problems.
Yeah.
It does seem like, Ishbia's route of getting federal dollars to take care of the land part is a lot more fruitful. So it makes sense that Reinsdorf doesn't have much to say, but you get into this awkward position. The White Sox don't have comment. The White Sox don't own the stadium. That's Illinois Sports Facility Authority. So and they don't typically make a lot of noise because they just basically take care of Rate Field and that's it. There isn't a whole lot for them to do. So they're not really a public concern unless they're prodded into commenting. And even then, like, you just don't hear much directly from them. So yeah, you have this idea of just two of like the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing, or the right hand not being able to acknowledge what the left hand is doing because it's technically not their business, but it kind of is. And it's very awkward. And especially since, we've seen the White Sox when they were trying to go with the original 78 plan, and the awkward tension between kind of slagging the neighborhood and saying Bridgeport is not suitable for a long-term home. We really want to be in the
Yeah.
South Loop to take the next step as a franchise, and you have all the modern amenities and kind of real estate plans that other teams benefit from. And then when that didn't pan out, they kind of had to make nice of the neighborhood again. You saw Sox Fest Live going to Ramova, and you saw them featuring local spots more, and that's cool. But now you get this idea of like the White Sox, being in a spot where they are generating a lot of fan enthusiasm, but also you have these independent maneuverings or independent, I guess quotes, just because they're not technically part of the White Sox yet. They're all Ishbia corporations doing this, and yeah, it does that tension, which I think is always going to be there until they break ground in the new stadium or until they move into the new ballpark, wherever it may be. There's always going to be this kind of idea that the White Sox don't want to be in Bridgeport. And I hope that, given the excitement of the season and given just how many fans are coming back to the White Sox, that this doesn't do anything to turn fans off, because they really, this would be, not necessarily an own goal, because it might pay off in the long run, and stadiums take a long time, but it just be unfortunate timing that these things overlap.
Yeah, because as far as our coverage at Sox Machine, like we're covering this new stadium effort where there's going to be two sides to this story: the excitement and the wondrous possibility that the Chicago White Sox could have a PNC type of park, or even like Petco in San Diego, of having this state of the art new stadium with the Chicago skyline as the backdrop in the South Loop. That's very exciting. And there's quite a bit of White Sox fans, and especially those that are in the Sox Machine comments, that are excited about that possibility, Jim. But there is the whole part of the story of what do you leave behind? Because the White Sox have been in this neighborhood for over a century. This would be like if the Cubs took that offer from Rosemont and they moved to Rosemont and abandoned Wrigley. We're seeing this unfold right now in Chicago, but on the South Side, being led by Justin Ishbia. And to revisit what the plan is. So, again, for those that are watching on YouTube, I have more visuals. And for those that are listening to the podcast, this again is the South Loop plot of land. So if you bring up Google Maps, you are looking in between like Roosevelt and 18th Street, along the river, opposite side of Project 78. Everyone that I've been speaking to, as far as local officials, Project 78, that pipe dream is not going to come to fruition for the White Sox. There's just not local support. When they wrote in as far as the city bill to approve as far as the fire to start their construction, the plan is only for one professional sports team to be on that plot of land. So that's why efforts are starting to look across the river. Speaking to sources within the White Sox, Jerry Reinsdorf is warming up to this idea of the White Sox, a new White Sox stadium being part of this master plan that Justin Ishbia is trying to implement by having an agreement to buy the land from Amtrak. That is the key phrasing. An agreement, but that purchase has not been finalized yet between Amtrak and Justin Ishbia. But the plan is, since the reporting from Crane's business journal in the Chicago area back in March, that Ishbia is going to be buying this land from Amtrak. That's why Amtrak needs to move to Bridgeport. They have to get out of the neighborhood. They have to move out. Ishbia is buying it and repurposing it. So for those that are watching on YouTube, that is the navy blue section that Justin Ishbia is buying. It's the closest part of the land, about 47 acres near the river. Amtrak also shares this square of Chicagoland with BNSF, which is a completely different rail line. And according to Crane's reporting last week, Justin Ishbia and BNSF are negotiating for Ishbia to buy that part of the rail lot, as well as BNSF can move out of that area and that opens up another 20 acres for Justin Ishbia. So this could be about 67 acres of area that Ishbia and his many companies, it sounds like that he's going to be starting to help with this project, Jim, can build whatever entertainment district that he wants in this area. So that is the South Loop plan for the White Sox. That's why Amtrak needs to move to Bridgeport, because they have to move somewhere. And that rail yard that Union Pacific currently owns, but has an agreement with Amtrak to sell to Amtrak, they have not been using that near Rate Field and in the middle of Bridgeport since 2019. So Amtrak looks at this as a great opportunity for them to radically improve their maintenance capabilities, which they pitch benefits not only Chicago for commercial and business rail purposes, but also throughout the entire Midwest, as Chicago is one of the nation's largest hubs of rail. So that's the benefit for Amtrak. Amtrak moving out allows Justin Ishbia to repurpose a huge part of the South Loop of Chicago in his vision. And that can give the White Sox an opportunity to build a brand new stadium closer to downtown, access to the river and the river walk, which continues to expand, getting closer to the Roosevelt CTA line, which houses many different CTA lines and not just the red line. And because BNSF, as far as I think it's Metra and Amtrak, do have to continue going through this plot of land, there is the possibility of having a rail line stop at this new facility that they're building. So for those that are coming from the southern suburbs of Chicago, can just stop here rather than having to go all the way to Union Station. How they do that, there's so many rumors right now. I have heard that Ishbia has been meeting with contractors and looking to build above the rail line. So the rail lines would be like the basement of this new facility, and they would build above it, raising the plot of land to pretty much be even with Roosevelt, which may look a little weird because it may look like it's towering over the Chicago Fire Stadium, Jim, across the river, where it looks like this new facility is looking down
Take the
on
high
the
ground.
Chicago Fire. Yeah, taking the high ground. Exactly. So that's the South Loop plan, and that's where, like, with again with Amtrak's plan for Bridgeport, to bring back as far as that visual, this is where Bridgeport residents are very upset because nobody asked them. Nobody asked them if this was okay for Amtrak to move into the neighborhood and build this industrial maintenance facility that will clearly not only impact as far as the local area when it comes to pollution, whether that's noise and air pollution, but nobody wants to live near a rail yard, Jim. And
Hmm.
there is very large concerns about property values for the neighbors in this area. And there is serious doubt in what the economic impact is going to be for the neighborhood. This isn't a rail line. This is a maintenance facility. All this facility is doing is just working on Amtrak trains. How does that bring any type of economic benefit to the neighborhood? So right now, Bridgeport residents are very upset. That's why I covered it on SoxMachine.com. There is going to be another meeting on the 26th. So I'm sure there's even going to be a larger outcry. But if you're a White Sox fan living outside of Bridgeport, man, Justin Ishbia is not gaining or currying any favor right now with the neighbors for the White Sox. And before this grand plan for the South Loop comes into fruition, the White Sox are going to be playing next to this Amtrak facility for at least a couple of seasons. It's going to be being constructed during the 2027 season. It'll be fully operational for the 2028 season. And if Amtrak does get this completed and they could officially move out, you still don't have a new baseball stadium in the South Loop for the 2029 season. Maybe if they hustle, you have one for the 2030 season. So moving forward, this is where I'm curious as far as podcast listeners and those that are watching YouTube. What is the White Sox response, knowing that for at least 2 seasons, Jim, they're playing next to this facility?
I guess, you know, if they have been saying that they can't, have the kind of first class facility they want in Bridgeport, having an active rail yard right next to their stadium would say, like, yeah, we're kind of penned in by this thing. We don't want to be next to this rail yard. We have to move. So that kind of, I guess, enhances
Yeah.
what has been their stance. But you're looking at the comments. There's one from Jane saying the move away from Bridgeport is going to happen. People need to get over it. And there's like people who just like the historical ties. There's that point. And yeah, that's, evolution happens. Things change, neighborhoods change, etc. But having just taken that train line in the BNSF line from Downers Grove into the city, when I was in town for the Sox Machine 20th anniversary weekend, and just kind of going through those rail yards and realizing like nothing's here. Like, nothing is there. They can work on those Amtrak trains and they're not disrupting anything. They're not disrupting traffic. There's no residents. There's like some chain stores. There's some box stores around there, like a Whole Foods and a Target's kind of by where those apartments are near the 78, but it's not that area is not serving anybody. It's serving machines and it's already there and it's established versus, Bridgeport, which, whenever I go to Sox games year after year, like there's always new businesses there. It seems like an improving neighborhood. The Sox are a draw, but also there are a lot of things that are a draw independent of the White Sox. Restaurants, the Ramova Theater being reborn is another one that's big on Halstead, and you get this idea that people are coming there, and it just you see this momentum happening, and you see your property values rising for people who are concerned about that, and then to remove the biggest draw. And yes, we're seeing the pedantic comment about Raid Field is not Bridgeport, but it affects Bridgeport residents. This move that we're talking about, so that's why we're saying Bridgeport, much larger area, much more, many more residents in Armour Square. But it's it's just it affects people. The moving the rail yard or moving a ballpark, whatever exists in the South Loop, does not affect people. This move, relocating the Amtrak yard to Bridgeport, affects people, and so I think that is worth keeping in mind because it's people. Land doesn't have feelings right now, and everything that is possibly going to happen with the South Loop is speculative. Sometimes these things boom and a neighborhood is born. Other times it just kind of is a thing. It's an entertainment district, but people don't necessarily live there, or you don't necessarily see like I'm kind of thinking with the salt shed and how that was supposed to be the big, yeah,
Oh
you
yeah,
mentioned it
that
when you were
never
talking
came to
about it.
fruition. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of salt shed's cool, but it's like that, there wasn't necessarily a boom around it. So when you're talking about the people, I think they're, Sox fans are the people who are attached to the historical uh, um, aspect of this, and then you have the people actually live there and work there, or want to have been accustomed for decades for a certain amount of noise and pollution that could drastically change without any like jobs being brought in or anything like that.
Yeah, and again, this agreement between Ishbia and Reinsdorf doesn't really come into play into the end of the 2029 calendar year, but Jerry Reinsdorf owns those options. So he has the power to exercise those options from the end of 2029 through 2033. Starting in the year of 2034, Ishbia can control that option, exercise his right to buy the team from Jerry Reinsdorf. So to come all together with this entire project, this is a lot of work, a lot of money by Justin Ishbia when he doesn't have controlling interest. Like, he is making significant future plans for a team that he could possibly own as soon as 2029. Because I was told that even if Jerry Reinsdorf were to pass away, he is 90 years old, before the 2029 option is exercised, his shares are passed down to his trustees, which involves both of his sons. Michael Reinsdorf is currently running the Chicago Bulls. His trustees could activate as far as those options, but that it's a whole process. It takes time. It's not automatic that Ishbia will gain control of the Chicago White Sox. Maybe Jerry's sons have a change of heart and they want to own the team for a few years. They definitely have that within their right. But this is a lot of work. First things first, the first dominoes, Amtrak's got to move out. They're moving to Bridgeport, and that's not going well. So I'm very curious to see on how the upcoming years go between the Chicago White Sox and some of their diehard fans in the area. But we are going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. Let's talk about some baseball. The Chicago White Sox are still home this weekend as the New York Mets roll into town, which means that old friend Luis Robert is also in town. We'll revisit the Robert trade and preview White Sox versus Mets next on the Sox Machine podcast.
SeatGeek is the official ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, and anytime you want to go to a game, you should go to SeatGeek. I used to call the director of team travel. I used to call the traveling secretary, whatever they want to be called, KP, to try to get a seat. But on SeatGeek, I can pick my own seat, and I can pick where I want to sit instead of being told where to sit.
Yeah, it's a great option. And summer is coming to an end here soon. I'm going out and finding all the day games possible, all the warm weather cities, so I could stay in this tank top. I can watch very competitive baseball. As the calendar turns into fall, I want to make sure that I get the most out of this tank top and warm weather. And SeatGeek is where I would go and get my seats.
You can use code Territory10 for 10% off your next set of MLB tickets at SeatGeek. That's 10% off MLB tickets with promo code Territory10. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later.
Howard, my dad was T-boned by a utility vehicle and is in surgery now. What should I do?
I'm sorry to hear about that. It's really great that you're getting him the medical care and treatment that he needs right now. These are 3 important things that I think you need to know. Injuries are unexpected and turn lives upside down. I'm Howard Ankin, and I'm here to help. If you or a loved one have been hurt at work or in a car, truck, or rideshare accident, call 312-6-million. Injury law made personal. That's Ankin Law.
The New York Mets are in town to face the White Sox this weekend. The Mets are 58-70. This has been a pretty disappointing year for them. Be very interesting to see how this offseason unfolds for the Mets. They won their last game. They've been playing a lot better baseball as of late, though. They are 7-3 in their last 10 games. They are 28-35 away from Queens this season. Your pitching probables for this series: Friday night, first pitch is at 6:40 p.m. Central Time for those attending. This is Elvis night. Always a very festive time at Rate Field. Stick around for the post show as well, as far as the Elvis impersonator. You got Sean Manaea for the New York Mets against Sean Burke for the Chicago White Sox. Saturday night, this is a 6:10 p.m. Central Time first pitch. It's right-hander Christian Scott, who's been pitching really well for the Mets this season. And it'll be Luis Castillo, who's been not great away from Rate Field, but in his one start with the White Sox at home was excellent against the Cincinnati Reds. So we'll see if he continues to pitch well at Rate Field. He'll take the ball. And then on Sunday, this could be another bullpen game for the White Sox. But they'll be going up against Nolan McLean, who's been really the Mets ace this year. We are expecting Eric Fedde to get the bulk of the innings for the White Sox on Sunday. But again, we'll see on how that unfolds for the White Sox, especially in games, tonight's game and Saturday's game, to see who is available in the bullpen. But Jim, White Sox and Mets. And that means it's old friend Luis Robert Jr. So it's time to check in on how he's been doing this season. And maybe the most important stat is that he's only played 48 games this season, and it hasn't been great, Jim. Luis Robert is batting .215 with a .290 on base percentage, slugging .362. His weighted runs created plus is just 84. He's got 7 home runs and 19 RBIs this season, and his WAR is 0.2 according to Fangraphs. So not great for the Mets on their side of the Luis Robert trade. So this ended up being a pretty big deal for the White Sox, Jim, and a great way to save some cash, because if they had kept Robert, and this is the version that the White Sox would have seen of Luis Robert, Jim, I don't know. I don't know where this team would be, really. Have you given that much thought about Luis Robert?
Once he got hurt at the end of April, early May, and went on the injured list for months, that's where I stopped thinking about it, just because that represented the kind of closing door of, could the Mets keep him healthier than he was with the White Sox? Were the White Sox doing something wrong? And it seems like the answer is no. It's kind of the way it goes. And it's kind of funny too, looking at the splits. His first month with the Mets, he drew a lot of walks. It was kind of strange that he was actually being super patient, and he was kind of getting on base even though the power wasn't there. gets hurt, comes back, and now he's kind of his old form where he's hitting for more power, but not drawing walks, striking out the amount that he used to, so that walk to strikeout ratio is out of whack. But it's funny, like no matter how much effort the Mets put towards trying to get a different result, it seems like the way he stabilizes or regulates, he always comes back to that form of just being hard to keep on the field, has some power, not always able to access it because of the plate discipline. I think the number that jumped out to me perhaps most is that he's 2 for 5 stealing bases this year. So I think the back issue that he had really seems to have put a damper on his burst, which I think was the best thing he had going for him last year. But I was looking at the transaction, the kind of the winter transaction chain that happened with the White Sox. And it's funny that when they traded him, their big move after trading Robert was signing Sir Anthony Dominguez. And he's no longer a part of things. And they had to use his money to send to Seattle for Luis Castillo and make that more palatable. So like Dominguez came and went, and the savings that the White Sox got was not exactly realized in the way they thought. It's more or less kind of immaterial. Like the White Sox benefited from trading him and freeing up the money and just not having to count on him. And even though like their plan A didn't work, their plan A for center field was Luis Angel Acuna and Brooks Baldwin, and Baldwin got hurt, and the White Sox abandoned their effort to make Acuna into an outfielder. It really kind of just seems like an irrelevant transaction, but maybe just the biggest impact was closing the chapter, knowing that whatever happens to them in 2026, they don't have to worry about how much Robert has to do with it, and then they can just continue planning without him.
For the Mets, obviously this has been a pretty disappointing season. I am curious on what the fallout is going to be. Are you expecting any fallout? Like David Stearns was the wonder boy, right? Like the Mets couldn't wait to bring David Stearns in, and maybe that could be their version of Andrew Friedman, someone who is obviously very successful in helping build the Milwaukee Brewers organization to what it is today. If you give him some cash, man, what could he do? Could the Mets be the Dodgers? And that obviously hasn't come to fruition. And I guess I'm a bit disappointed in the Mets, Jim. On behalf of Mets fans, when Steve Cohen bought the team, I thought onward and upward for this Mets organization. This is going to be pretty exciting. Hasn't come anything close to that.
Seems like Stearns probably has one more year. They did fire Mendoza, like they did go through that. So they took care of like the manager, which is the simplest thing to switch out. But I think a GM, based on how much they turned over, and it was funny when Stearns was a free agent, all signs pointed to him going to the Mets, but I was kind of holding out hope that the White Sox might be able to make a deal in terms of giving him some kind of new challenge. And maybe he likes the Midwest and being kind of like the Craig Counsell move of just going from Milwaukee to Chicago. Not that big of a move, and you can kind of keep all the creature comforts he had, basically. And then you realize that, whether it's Stearns going to New York, whether it's Counsell going to the Cubs, even like the White Sox got a piece of it, Walker McKinnon going to their coaching staff. It's like the Brewers just keep chugging along. They're the sum is much greater than any one of their parts. So yeah, I think we learned a lot about just in terms of how. Yeah, and we've seen this with the Rays too. I guess the national, the Brewers, the National League version of the Rays, in terms of just the organization is so strong that they can suffer brain drain, or they can be poached directly from the top. And yet the decisions they make, the information that they have, that they're able to generate is still so strong and layers deep that one move can't really disrupt what they're doing.
I am curious this Friday night, again, Sean Manaea, what happens for the White Sox offense. We know that against lefties this season, Jim, it has been quite a bit of a struggle, but they're coming off a game where they only had one hit, to quote Harry Doyle. One hit from the movie Major League. That's
one GD hit.
Yeah, that's Bob Uecker. And I'm a bit surprised they didn't do more against Grant Holmes. They hit a lot of line drives. There was some hard contact, but great defense for Atlanta, and even a better bullpen for the Atlanta Braves to shut out the White Sox. So I guess that's for this series, Jim. That's where I'm curious, because Sean Burke wasn't all that great against the Chicago Cubs, but he was amazing against the Cincinnati Reds, and the White Sox were not able to capitalize on that opportunity. I am curious to see what the White Sox do trying to bounce back from the Atlanta loss 2-0. So that's what I'm going to be paying attention to tonight between the White Sox and Mets. Is there anything in particular in this weekend series that you are really focusing on and maybe wanting to highlight before the games are actually played?
Well, the Mets are playing better. Like, I've looked at their monthly splits, and they've been hitting better every single month. I mean, they started from rock bottom in terms of offensive production, so they really had nowhere to go but up. But it's been pretty steady in terms of April to May to June to July, now to August. That they've been slowly figuring it out, and they probably wish they could start the season over again and see what they see what they have left. But yeah, I mean, I didn't see any, aside from the result. There are some ugly swings against the front end of the, or back end of the Atlanta bullpen. But I thought the plate approach was generally sound. Like the approach they had against Shota Imanaga in the Cubs series, where they were just waving over splitter after splitter after splitter, looked like they were trying to pull on it. Their body was pulling away from the plate, and just everything was tailing away from them. That was a little bit. You hope they could contain it to one game, and I think they more or less did with the way they hit Kevin Gossman. But then you saw the way they react to sliders, especially the power sliders after Holmes left, and some ugly swings there, trying to manage in and out and breaking away versus fastballs tying them up. So again, you hope that that's one episode where just they were kind of caught off guard, or maybe they got lulled into what Holmes had and kind of tracking that pretty well, and then just seeing the high octane arms that came afterwards. Had a hard time adjusting. That happens in a game. Combination of bad luck and just really good bullpen usage and execution that ties hitters up. So yeah, just how quickly they can put it behind them. And we've seen, we just saw it with the Cubs series, that the White Sox looked like they could have really had an ugly series where they're kicking themselves for missing some opportunities to win games, and then having an unfavorable pitching matchup with Jose Urquidy, and then Urquidy throws the game of his post Tommy John surgery life. I should say second Tommy John surgery life. And the White Sox offense just does just enough. So yeah, it's a case where, yeah, I'd like to see them again go back to their resourcefulness. I think Colson Montgomery you want to buy into what seem like better at bats, but eventually the results have to start bearing that out. Otherwise, it's just kind of the most effective version of him is still not somebody who's generating a lot of power. So I think that's maybe where I look at with some righties that have some strikeout stuff, but also can be taken deep. Can Montgomery get back on the home run path and put a challenge into the contest that we talked about with between Murakami and Vargas? Kind of looks like a 2-horse race right now.
I do want to give a cap tip to Shundy. I was wrong. I said that Burke's last start was against the Cubs. That's right. It was not. It was the Tigers. It was that Sunday game where he struggled in that game, and the Tigers had the 4-1 lead, and the White Sox were able to come back. So thank you, Shundy. I was wrong. What was that? Around the horn or not around the horn? Pardon the interruption. Stat boy. Yes.
Yep.
I was wrong. So Shundi, thank you for that correction during the live stream. But yeah, we'll see how Sean Burke bounces back on Friday against the New York Mets. We'll see how Luis Castillo does on Saturday. It'd be great if they both can go at least 6 innings for the White Sox to buy more time for the bullpen to rest. I thought Anthony Kay pitched pretty well, Jim, against the Atlanta Braves, and did his job in trying to eat up as many innings as possible, as the back end of that bullpen for the White Sox is pretty taxed. Right now, the White Sox could really use a day off. Unfortunately, they're not getting that day off until Thursday, but yeah, they could really, really use a day off. We have one more break for a word from our sponsors, but coming up next, we're going to take a look around the American League Central and also take a look at the current playoff seedings in the American League next on the Sox Machine podcast.
We have poppin' colors for Mack Weldon here. I've got a little green shade. You've got a nice blue shade. And what else do you love about Mack Weldon, Kratz?
I can be head to toe with Mack Weldon. I have the underwear, I have the shorts, I have the pants, I have the socks. Obviously, we got the shirt and the jackets, but it's head to toe comfort no matter what piece they send. I even have a belt that looks sick.
And make sure you check out Mack Weldon's AirKnit X fabric to help you out. Their lightest fabric fused with nylon mesh for maximum airflow. Skip the midday wardrobe changes. The barely there feel also keeps you feeling more dry and more fresh. You can browse that collection at mackweldon.com. Don't sweat the heat this summer. Feel as effortlessly cool as you look with Mack Weldon. Go to mackweldon.com and get 20% off your first order of $125 or more with promo code FOUL. That's MACKWELDON.com, code FOUL.
Taking a look at the American League Central standings, again, the Chicago White Sox enter this weekend with a record of 66-61. They're 3.5 games ahead of the Minnesota Twins, who are 63-65. The Guardians are in third place with a 62-66 record, 4.5 games back at the White Sox. And the Tigers are 61-66. They're 5 games back of the White Sox. When you check out the postseason projection graphs from Fangraphs, the White Sox playoff odds or odds of making the postseason are now at 63.7%. Taking a look at the division odds, Fangraphs is giving the White Sox a 50.8% chance of winning the American League Central. So more times than not, out of the 1,000 simulations, the White Sox end up holding on in the American League Central. When we take a look at this weekend's games, the American League Central, so the Minnesota Twins are at the San Diego Padres. That's a tough series for the Twins because the Padres have been playing a lot better baseball as of late, Jim. The Detroit Tigers are the Kansas City Royals. I don't know what to make of the Royals, but they've been playing better baseball as of late. Bobby Witt Jr. has returned. And the Cleveland Guardians are playing the Colorado Rockies. I am curious to see how that series goes for the Guardians because say what you want about the Rockies, but those games are interesting at Coors Field this year. The Rockies have been starting to hit. But when you take a look at the AL seeding right now, the number 1 seed is still the Tampa Bay Rays. The White Sox are still the number 2 seed, meaning that your wild card matchup of the season were to end today would be the Houston Astros, the 3rd seed, against the 6th seed Minnesota Twins. Jim, are you buying the Twins as a serious postseason contender in this year's American League?
Not really. And again, I haven't bought the Twins all year. And I keep, yeah, I want to be able to put them in the rear view mirror and just say like, yeah, my skepticism or our skepticism of the Twins was correct. But the American League being as weak as it's been, and their offense being as good as it was, especially in the first half, we talked about this over the course of the past few months in terms of this is a season for Hellraisers, and the White Sox have been a Hellraiser. And I think the Twins are also in that field of just, if you score enough runs in this American League, you can win some games and you can make a hard series for your opponents. Like the Tigers struggled to score runs early. The Guardians haven't scored runs all year. And I think that's what's separating them right now, that to the degree they're narrowly separated is that the Twins are, they've been scoring runs. Now the second half has been a different, matter in terms of seems like they're kind of just getting by in the margins, and some of their left-handed bats have not been delivering. Their starters have been not going deep into games. Speaking of teams trying to figure out rotation issues, with Joe Ryan being just not what he was in the first half, or not being the presence he was in the rotation, not being really bankable. So it's hard to see them sustaining it just because they don't have pitching, or their pitching's been a question mark all year. The bullpen's been iffy all year, and then the offense looks like it might be petering out. But it's just, I don't know who in the American League has a better case. The Tigers seem like maybe, but also they traded Skubal and Mize. The Guardians haven't been hitting all year. They always could theoretically do it, but this could also be the year where it doesn't work because Jose Ramirez isn't his usual self. And then, and it's not just the American League Central that's weak. It's the West is also bad and maybe worse than the Central. So like when you have that many teams that just aren't putting it together, I guess the Twins, they're keeping their Walker Jenkins powder dry to where, they just call up Kalen Culpepper and he's been decent out of the gates. And then they have Jenkins who could theoretically provide a boost. So they have some reserves that might make them more interesting or more dynamic. So maybe that's how they overcome their current limitations. But yeah, I just don't. Yeah, there isn't, I think, a favorite to where like, yeah, I don't buy the Twins, but I don't really buy anybody else. And a lot of people might look at the White Sox and not buy them, and like, yeah, I mean, kind of in terms of like the standard American League Central Division leader, yeah, they're weaker than they usually are, than that team usually is. So yeah, you can question everybody, I think.
The White Sox lead the American League in runs scored. I mean, they're 10 games back of the Rays for the top seed, and the Yankees are 4 games back of the Rays. So when you look at overall records, it's Rays, Yankees, Red Sox, and the White Sox. That's it. That's all the teams that have a winning record right now in the American League. It's just 4 teams, with the Astros being at 500. And these are all the teams within 3 games of the final wild card spot. Rangers, who come into town next week. Blue Jays, they're not dead. They're just a half game out. Guardians, Tigers, Orioles, they're 2 games out. The Seattle Mariners are only 3 games out of the final wild card spot. I continue to think that the Mariners are dead, but they just called up one of the top prospects in all of Major League Baseball, Cade Anderson, who was my number 1 draft prospect a couple years ago when Seattle selected him. We'll see whatever boost Cade Anderson provides, but Seattle needs to score a lot more runs. They've only scored 500 runs this season, which is a very, very low amount. So I'm with you. I still have a hard time believing that if the season were to end today, the Minnesota Twins, Jim, would be in the postseason. But I don't know out of that collection of teams who I like the most. Maybe Toronto, just because of the experience. Maybe. But then again, they sold at the deadline, and wow.
Yeah, I guess they didn't quite. They at least reposition themselves for 2027 versus like a true sell-off.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
perhaps they see the return from that earlier than you think, or they're able to hold the ground. But yeah, it's just the nobody. There's an opportunity for the taking. Nobody really took it, and so you just have this just pile of teams. It'd be a lot shorter to talk about who's not in the running, which is basically the Angels, Athletics, and Royals. Everybody else can theoretically convince themselves into having a chance.
You're still alive. Every other American League podcast out there, we're still alive. All right. Well, we'll see what the White Sox do this weekend. Hopefully they can extend their lead. And of course, we're always keeping an eye on the scoreboard to see on how the other teams, the American League Central, fare. Because as of right now, the Chicago White Sox control their own destiny, which is a great position to be in. But this will do it for this episode of Sox Machine Live, which will be live streaming the podcast on our YouTube channel, which you subscribe to. So if you are watching right now on YouTube, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you're listening to this, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. We always take the audio version of these live streams and post them into our podcast feed, which you can subscribe to the Sox Machine podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media. We're on all the social media platforms at Sox Machine. You can follow me at SoxMachine_Josh as we continue to report on the new stadium efforts for the Chicago White Sox. We'll be posting as far as those videos and pictures from these community meetings on our social media platforms. So definitely follow us there. And again, we still have our sale as far as the first month subscription, which with the White Sox having a winning percentage of 520, Jim, is this 52 cents right now for the first month?
Yeah, probably should be. I just keep it at 53 to maximize our revenue. That one penny,
that extra penny
makes a huge difference. Yeah. No, it should be 52, but yeah, every time I switch it to 52, then it's 53. So yeah, haven't changed it, I think.
All right. So if you go right now, it's 53 cents for your first month. Afterwards, it's just $5 a month. And your Sox Machine subscription dollars help us cover the Chicago White Sox and even the new stadium efforts as well. That gets you the ad-free version of both the website and the podcast, unlocks the comment section. We've been having more people apply to be part of our Veterans Committee. Again, our VC members really help shape as far as our coverage and our future plans at Sox Machine. If you'd like to be part of the Veterans Committee, you can inquire within at soxmachine.com/products. Sox Machine Live is a production of soxmachine.com. You're on for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Foul Territory Network. Alongside Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. We really appreciate you guys watching the live stream. So, as always, thanks for watching and listening.